It's like, okay, well, let's start talking about the myths of leadership. And those two are pretty big myths that happen. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to come onto your podcast, is because that leading with integrity is so critical, that understanding what leadership is, hopefully before you get into it. But then once you do get into it, really understanding that it's not an accurate representation from the outside looking in.
If we assume that everyone you work with, all the people that you lead, are going to be talking about you at the dinner table every evening, or at least one or two evenings a week, most likely, then what do you want them to be saying about you to their family, to their loved ones, to the people that they vent to about work? It's an interesting question. It was posed by today's guest, and you'll hear that a bit later on in this episode. But it speaks very much to the incredible responsibility of leadership, the role that you play as a leader in other people's lives, and the impact that you can have, for good or for bad. So, something to think about. We'll certainly be talking about it today with my guest, Summer, who has some amazing lessons from her time at Disney, from her experiences now doing what she does as a leadership keynote speaker and an author of a new leadership book that's only recently come out. So keep listening to the end and find out how to get a copy of that book, because after listening to the rest of this episode, I'm certain that you will want to buy one. I know I'm going to. Let's get Summer on the show. Let's hear all about her experiences, expertise, opinions, insights, and more when it comes to leadership and management and the various challenges and problems that we all encounter in those roles.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Summer, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show. Really looking forward to hearing all of your leadership stories today.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's exciting to have you as well, so the feeling's mutual. And to kick us off, over to you, really. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career history so far, your background, what you do today, and why you do it.
Absolutely. So I discovered at a very early age that there was a difference between being the bossy kid on the playground and being a leader. And so even from an early age, before I had the words to know the differences, I really wanted to understand what made some people worth following and what made some people where leadership was just like pulling teeth. And so everything that I did, from the degrees that I received and the organizations that I worked for, all came down to distilling what makes leaders effective. That has become my life's purpose, of removing the behaviors of toxic leadership in the workplace and really helping leaders uncover how can they find their own unique magic. And so I've worked at amazing organizations, everything from a ski resort to a dude ranch, Walt Disney World, the Disney Institute. And now I am a keynote leadership speaker and trainer and author.
Okay. Quite a long list of things then.
I'm still getting used to the author. The book was released last week.
Oh, wow. Okay. So a new author as well then.
A new author, yes.
Amazing. So what's the book about then?
It's about leadership. So it's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership, 5 Keys to Inspire Yourself, Empower Others, and Drive Extraordinary Results. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's hard to contain so much awesomeness, which is the short title.
That is true. I find that with podcast episode titles as well. It is a struggle. The struggle is real.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is by Mark Twain, and it says, "If I would have had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter."
Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard that one, but it is good, definitely. So Disney, that obviously stands out in your career history. I'm sure it does probably for you as well. Is it true, though, that before you worked there, you weren't a Disney fan? And if so, are you now? And what changed your mind?
Yes. So it is true. I grew up with the Disney movies, Little Mermaid, Cinderella, Snow White, and I could never see myself in the princesses. I was more of a take charge kind of girl, if you will. And that happily ever after thing never really sit right for me. And then I found my own Prince Charming. And while we were dating, he was an absolute Disney nut. Could not believe I had never been to Disney World. And so our first vacation together, he brought me to Disney. And I can remember standing in line for about an hour and a half, but it was the coolest line I've ever been in. It was at Test Track. I was learning about cars. And in that moment, I really wanted to know, how do they do this? How do they make the experience so amazing from the moment that you actually get on the bus at the airport to the end of the vacation? I graduated college a little bit late. I was 30 when I graduated. It was right after the recession. Nobody was hiring except Disney. They had the college program. And so started working at Disney on the college program, then did the management internship. And that was when I fell in love. The impact that they have on individuals and their ability to look at everything was really impressive. And I admired and still admire that a lot. So yes, I am absolutely a hardcore Disney fan. Still not a big fan of most of the princesses, but now we have things like Marvel and Star Wars. So as I like to say, my company finally got cool.
Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, was do you think your opinion would have been different in earlier life had General Leia been a Disney princess many years earlier?
Absolutely. And thank you for calling her General Leia. Most people call her princess, and it's like, no, she is a general. She earned that. So yes, once we got Star Wars, once they got Star Wars and Marvel, it was absolutely game changer.
And when you're talking about being the more take charge sort of person who didn't fit with the Disney princess, Leia immediately popped into my brain. So there you go.
She is one of my idols.
Yeah, definitely one of the best characters of all time, I have to say.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so getting into leadership then, I mean, it is one of those things. I mean, I'm obviously very passionate about it, and you're in the right place because you are as well. Yes. So for you, like, what was it once you entered sort of the world of work that really sparked that passion?
I remember when I was trying to figure out my second time in college, what I was going to go to school for. And I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I knew that I wanted to be in charge. So this concept of leadership has always been a calling. And I knew I didn't want to mess it up, because the thing about leadership and the thing that makes leadership so powerful is when we get it right, we change people's lives. And when we get it wrong, we change people's lives. And so it's how, when I was leading individuals and had teams that followed me, how could I do the best for them while also making sure that I had enough of me left over at the end of the day for my family and those in my personal life that depended on me? And how could I make sure that I never unintentionally hurt somebody that was choosing to follow me? Because that's one thing that we forget as leaders. We think we have all the power, but we can't be a leader if people don't choose to follow us. So I wanted to be a leader that was worthy of following. And that's what I do now in my organization, is teach leaders, how can you be a leader that is worthy of following, with the new balance of making sure you have enough to give to your family at the end of the day, which that's a really hard balance for those that are leaning all into leadership, is they're giving everything to their employees. And many times, especially in the beginning, they don't have anything left over for themselves. So they get resentful and they stop leading, when those are the types of leaders that we desperately need.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a wider conversation, isn't there? I mean, not just in leadership, but about balance. I'm not sure about work-life balance and that phrase, but
it's
also, yeah, but also I can't think of a better way of saying it that everyone will then know what I mean.
Yes, I'm in the same boat. It's trying to figure out that 50-50 balance when we know it's a myth, but what is the better terminology? It's finding the balance that works well for you and yours. That's what I talk about. Yeah,
that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, because I think balance, you're right, it does sort of imply 50-50, doesn't it? Because that's how balance works, right? I mean, but it's not, of course. I mean, you could look at it from literal time spent and hours in the day, and work will always win, unfortunately, because where we spend the majority of our waking lives anyway. Mm-hmm. Maybe sleep wins. Don't know. Haven't done the maths.
I think sleep should win, but for many of us, it doesn't. It comes in last.
Yeah. There's another issue there, of course. Yeah. Yes. But I really like as well the way you talk about changing people's lives. And I think leadership, most people look at leadership and think, well, that's the thing that inspires people. It changes their lives for the good. And that is true when you get it right, as you say. What I think is quite often overlooked and not talked about is when you get it wrong, it still changes people's lives. It has impact on their careers even for many, many years into the future. And I think that's why I like to think as well about leadership as a responsibility as much as it is a privilege. And again, I think that's something that not enough people think about when they're in that position.
Yeah, so many times especially when like we're working with new managers, I'll ask, why did you want to be a leader? And they're either it's a combination of I wanted more money, or they look like they don't really do anything all day and that seemed fun. And it's like, okay, well, let's start talking about the myths of leadership. And those two are pretty big myths that happen. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to come onto your podcast, is because that leading with integrity is so critical, that understanding what leadership is, hopefully before you get into it. But then once you do get into it, really understanding that it's not an accurate representation from the outside looking in. You have to actually be in it to understand what are the pressures, the fact that you're going to be kept up at night trying to figure out how to have a difficult conversation, or there's an emergency at work, so you have to leave your kid's soccer game, like what that responsibility. It is a privilege, but it also is a responsibility, sometimes heavier than others, as we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, I think that's another aspect of it, isn't it? From the outside looking in, when you're not the leader, particularly if you're working for a good one, there'll be so much going on behind the scenes that you won't realize. And it may look to you like all they do is show up and have a couple of conversations and then disappear for an early lunch and then take the rest of the day off and all that. But you don't know what they're doing when they're not there. At least with the good ones. With the bad ones, they probably are just slacking off the whole time. And yeah, maybe it's fair. But the trick, I think, in figuring them out is the impact they've had on you at work. If they've made your job better, your day better even, that's usually a green flag, isn't it?
Well, and it's always like when I'm doing trainings, I tell leaders, your employees will talk about you around the dinner table. What do you want them to say? And I think for a lot of leaders that really, it's like, oh, they're taking what I do home. And there was a study that came out by the Mayo Clinic. I'm not going to quote it, but it's been quite a few years. And it showed that a leader has more impact on their employees' personal health than the employee's physician. And when we think about what happens when we get a great leader, life just seems a little bit easier. It may be hard, but we know that we have the tools, the resources, and the support to do it. Whereas when we get a bad leader, it increases our blood pressure, decreases sleep, impacts our relationships at home. So we can see that this impact, it definitely continues out of the workplace. And our employees, whether we're good leaders or not, are going to be talking about us at the dinner table. And so when that happens, what do we want them telling our family? And I think that really can drive it home for leaders. As you said, that responsibility that we have, that is so critical to get right.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Something else that interests me that you said as well is that we start preparing leaders before they get the job. I'd love it if that were the norm. Like this whole accidental manager thing, isn't there, where people, they just fall into the job or they're promoted because they're really good at their last job. It doesn't mean they'll be any good as a leader, even leading people who are doing their last job. It's totally different skill sets. But there's also that aspect as well about the route to progression, the route to more money. There's so many people, I think, who feel obligated almost because they need more money or they want more money. They have to go the leadership route because in so many organizations, that's the only option. Unless you're in something like sales where, the possibilities are endless. What do you think is the best way to start building that leadership knowledge up before you're promoting people? Yeah,
actually Disney does it really well. One of the things that Disney does, and I've tried to bring it into organizations that I worked for and now work with, and I'm always surprised when people are like, oh, we can't do that. But Disney had what they called the leadership bench. And so if I'm interested in leadership, let's say I'm a frontline merchandise cast member, so I work in retail, and I really want to be a leader. I don't have to have a college degree. I don't have to have gone certain steps. I go through the hiring process, so multiple interviews, doing all of the things. And then once I'm selected, I put on the leadership bench. And what happens is when, let's say we have a leader who goes out on maternity leave, Disney will look at the bench, find somebody whose skill set and personality would line well with that team for that 6 to 12 weeks, brings them in. They are a salaried leader during that time. And then when that leader that had the baby comes back from maternity leave, the temporary leader, we call it TA, temporary assignments, the TA would go back to the bench. And so you really got to practice this leadership concept in small, safe spaces before it became a permanent position. And the other really valuable piece to it is it allowed leaders that were in the operation, we call them status, so permanent leaders, to be able to take that time away and not worry because they weren't leaving their team in a bind. And so I know when I was pregnant, my pregnancy was really rough, and I ended up working only 4 months out of the 12 months of the year from pregnancy to coming back after maternity leave. And I never had to worry about it. And I was actually kind of happy because I was giving somebody an opportunity to test and prove themselves. So there are ways to do that in the commercial environment. It's just sometimes it can be a little complicated going from hourly to salary and what that looks like. But one of the core pieces when we're looking at future leaders is understanding that just because they're phenomenal technically doesn't mean they're going to be a good leader. It's two very distinctive skill sets. And so often we're looking at who's the best performer versus who is going to be able to lead people.
Definitely. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with the whole logic of we reward you for being really great at your job by giving you a much harder job and not telling you how to do it. Like, yeah, I don't know. It feels somewhat problematic, that, doesn't it? When a boss tells you, "Congrats, here's more responsibility."
Well, a lot of times the employee doesn't feel like they have a choice.
Well, no, exactly. And even when they do, they maybe don't really, because who's going to feel like they're confident or well off enough to say no to a pay rise? I don't think anyone ever says no to a pay rise.
Exactly.
Because why would you? It's not how the market, it's not how the world works right now either. But yeah, it is an interesting one. I think there's a lot to be said as well for actually asking people if they're interested in leadership too. Imagine
that. Asking people what they would like to do, listening when people say this is something that I'm interested in. It's such a foreign concept that I think we're getting much better at over the past 4 years. It's coming front of mind instead of us as leaders making the decision that we know what's best for our people, actually asking and having conversations with them. So I love that you brought that up, because absolutely ask the questions.
Yeah, it's funnily enough, one of the best leaders I've ever seen, and this was like decades ago when I was a teenager. It was in a youth organisation. One of the best leaders I've ever seen was the one who said, "No, I don't want a leadership position, please. That's not for me. I don't want that responsibility." Mm-hmm. And yet, every single day in that role, he was leading his peers. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he actually realised it. I haven't seen him for decades. I'd love to ask him. I don't know if he realised it, but he would just be like, there's something someone was struggling with. The actual appointed leaders were totally oblivious, but he would pick it up. He would help them. He would make sure they got the job done and they understood how to do it next time. And then he'd go back and he'd check in with them, make sure they were still confident with it, and little things like that. And if he saw somebody struggling, he'd take a bit of work off them, put it on his own shoulders instead. And there's all those kind of little things. And yet he said he didn't want to be a leader. And I'm like, mate, you are. Like, look at it.
You're already doing it.
But he wouldn't have it. It was, very... Yeah, that was quite a big lesson for me as well, actually, about the nature of leadership and how it can be falsely associated to role or title or authority and so on.
Yeah, the Center for Creative Leadership, they have a great definition for leadership, and I can't remember the whole thing, but the beginning is that leadership is a social process. And when we think about it, it's exactly what you say. So many times we think about leadership being a title or a pay raise or the boss, when leadership truly is that social process. And effective leaders with the title, effective leaders will go into their teams and look to see who are those informal leaders. Who are the ones, like the gentleman that you spoke of, that is helping people, that is taking on the weight, and how can I work to make their life easier? What can I do? Because when they're working to make everybody else's life easier, that's making my life easier. So how can I reward that and recognize that, instead of just being completely oblivious to the person that's probably saving your team?
Yeah, definitely. Certainly was keeping it going for a considerable period of time, in my opinion, with hindsight and the benefit of all of that. Another kind of recurring theme that comes up quite a lot with leadership is that whilst in many ways it's relatively simple conceptually, practically it can be really difficult. There's a reason why we make careers out of it, why this podcast exists, why there's so much written on the subject. It's because it's really difficult to get it right. Why is that, do you think?
I think when we think about leadership will never be easy, and it shouldn't, because when you have that responsibility, there should be thought that goes into it. So leadership will never be easy, but it's not as complicated as we make it either. And so when we can think about leadership, I always say ego has no place in leadership, because generally that's what's messing up leadership. If I'm a leader, that's what's messing up my leadership, and what's messing up my relationships with others is my ego. So when we can check the ego and understand that we're there for our team, we're there for our organization, we can effectively balance the needs of both, because that's where a lot of the struggle comes in. You have a leader that leans way too far for the organization or way too far for their team, and they can't balance the needs of both. Then leadership becomes, again, not easy, but easier. And so one of the things that's kind of a passion point for me right now is when we think about employee engagement, we utilize employee engagement as like the silver bullet, that when we have highly engaged employees, everything's going to be great. And we're holding leaders responsible for that employee engagement. When we look at the leadership or the research, employee engagement is made up of multiple things, but most of it's going to be internal. So it's kind of like work ethic. Generally, somebody's going to have a strong work ethic, or they're going to have not a strong work ethic, but that's driven by them, not the leader. The leader can enhance it. The leader can make it better, remove obstacles, but it starts with the employee. And so right now we're essentially holding leaders accountable for something that they have very little control over. They can enhance and influence, but they can't create engagement. That has to come from the employee themselves. And so when we're looking at this and we're holding leaders accountable to standards that are unrealistic and oftentimes impossible for them to reach, we'll get behaviors that we're not expecting. Like one of the behaviors that we're seeing is leaders that are avoiding conflict. And you know as well as I do, leading with integrity, you have to be able to have difficult conversations. It is not an option. And when we're trying to make our employees our friends, we're seeing the challenges and the unintended consequences of those actions. So I think really looking at what leadership is and breaking down some of the myths of what leadership is not is the first step to demystifying leadership, if you will.
The employee engagement one is interesting. I think maybe the flip side of it would be employee retention as well. Mm-hmm. And I see where you're coming from. I think there is a lot of it that is probably not going to be down to leaders, or it's down to factors over which they will never have any real control.
Right.
Having said that, I mean, there's quite a few studies. There's one from a couple of years ago. I think it was Gallup. They did quite a lot of research onto that. I mean, first of all, the figures globally were pretty poor. And then there was the follow-on statistic around what's the reason for that. Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty high number. It was 70%, I think, off the top of my head, but don't quote me. Said that the main impact on that was their manager. Mm-hmm. And so when you see studies like that, and you do have to wonder as well, maybe there's some bias built in, like if it's the employees you're asking, they're probably never going to say, well, it's me. I just can't be bothered. Are they? I mean, no one's going to honestly say, yeah, not many people are going to be honest or self-aware enough to say that. Mm-hmm. And I guess the manager is the easy scapegoat, aren't they? Because that's the first point of contact for most employees. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. This is the danger of statistics, of course, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think when we're looking specifically at employee engagement, I like that you brought up employee retention, because that's what leaders have impact over. They have an impact over retention. But a lot of times, if you tell a leader you are responsible for essentially the professional happiness of your employee, whether or not they are engaged, leaders are going to avoid difficult conversations. Accountability is going to suffer. And we know, the research shows again and again and again, that we know that their accountability and morale are directly tied together. You cannot have a team that has high morale if you don't also have a team that is being held accountable and can safely hold each other accountable as well. And so I think that's where the damage of employee engagement comes in, is we're telling employees, your leader is responsible for your engagement. Because when the employee surveys come out, they say, does your leader ensure that you have an environment where you can be engaged? The way that we're framing the questions, and with the best of intentions, but the way that we're framing the questions is telling the employee the leader is responsible for this. When in reality, if you think about highly engaged employees, a lot of times those employees are going to be the ones that can require more time from the leader. And so, you think about somebody who's super ambitious, super hungry. They want to do an amazing job. They're going to be like, leader, lead me, teach me, show me all of these things. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. The leader's trying to manage everything. They don't have time for that. That employee's engagement, that passion and energy that they're putting into that isn't just going to disappear, but it can start showing up in unintended consequential behavior. So career limiting behavior. So when we think about engagement, I think there's a lot more research that has to be done with the lens that it is not the silver bullet. It may be. I could be completely wrong because we don't have this research yet. That's actually what I'm going to school for my PhD, is to do this research. But if the way we're looking and the way we're framing it is setting leaders up to not be able to succeed, that's hurting them and their teams as well.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about balance earlier, didn't we? I think there is a balance to be had there between leaders doing enough, and certainly retention, I think, is a better place to focus. I mean, we've probably all seen that cliche, haven't we? It goes around social media every couple of months about people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. Again, I'm not sure I'm convinced about that, particularly in the economic times we've had of late. I think there's quite a few people who will stick it out longer than they might have otherwise. But it's something leaders should be thinking about. And then even with retention though, right? So I think a high retention rate may not necessarily indicate poor leadership or good leadership, right? It could just be in your industry, it's the norm that people change job every year or two. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily a reflection on leadership. In fact, it might be a positive. It might be you've developed them so well, and you've inspired them to built up their ambition, and you've enabled them to go and get a bigger, better job in another company.
Exactly.
That could be a good thing. So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
It is. Yes. And when we think about that, like I love that you made those connections, because we're telling leaders like retention is where it's at. You got to keep your people. But then that means, are we developing people? Are we allowing them to go into different positions? If I have somebody who's maybe not good at the job they're doing for me, but I can see where they would be phenomenal at this other job, am I giving them the skill set and the tools to be able to develop that to go there? Like, when we're thinking through all of these pieces, it's not just one size fits all. And I think that's one of the challenges with leadership, is we really want the one size fits all. We want that leadership training that's going to do an amazing job, turn out phenomenal leaders. And when we do that, we take away the human aspect of the same thing we teach leaders. How do you perform for the individual in front of you? I think that's what makes leadership training, consulting, coaching so challenging, is the human aspect of it. Because there's always, in most cases, we can't just make blanket statements like retention is good or highly engaged employees are always good.
Completely agree with that. I think context is really important, isn't it? And that means anything from like context of the individual that you're dealing with, context of your team as a whole, context of your industry. I mean, context in terms of retention might be, yeah, you're getting a directive that retention is your primary performance measure as a leader. So that means you're going to make sure that nobody's going to leave, and you're probably going to end up keeping people that you probably don't want because they're not doing a very good job for whatever reason.
Yeah. And then you're going to run off your rock stars because they're not going to want to stay with the low performers that you just don't want to get rid of.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that's more of an extreme end of the scale. But yeah, who knows? Who knows? Don't have the research, as you say.
Not yet. Give me a few more years.
Okay, I'll be watching. But I think that topic leads us quite nicely into the next question, which is about organizational culture. So, I mean, if leadership's hard to get right, that is just as hard, if not worse, I think. So what would you recommend then for the leader who wants to improve the culture of their team or their organization? What should they do or not do?
And that's two separate questions. So when we're looking at how do we improve the organizational culture, that's a very big statement. So let's focus, because I know your podcast focuses on managers and leaders that are newer, not necessarily executive levels. So when we're thinking about a leader leading their teams and trying to create the culture of the team, the question that they need to ask themselves is, if I say that this is my culture, what behaviors do I want to represent that? Because when we think about culture, culture happens whether or not we're paying attention. And so it's what behaviors do I want to happen? And this is one thing that, again, using Disney, they do really well, that everybody knows culture of Disney, magic, pixie dust, all of the fun things. And we would take that and break it down for our teams and ask, okay, if we think about magic, David, I saw you interacting with that guest today. It was a really magical experience. Let me explain to you what made it so magical. Or can you explain to me what made it so magical? So then we're taking this kind of nebulous concept and breaking it down into very specific behaviors. So I, as a leader, knows what my employee sees as the culture, and the employee gets to understand what I see as the culture. And so many times we think, I'm going to say that my culture is we take care of our guest every time. Okay, great. But when the guest shows up and they need assistance and your policies and procedures make it so your frontline employees can't actually help that guest, then there's a disconnect between what you're saying your culture is versus what that employee is experiencing. And so when we think about culture, it really is breaking it down to those behaviors and paying attention to the details, helping as leaders, knowing what the culture means for us, for our personal passion, why we're in it, what our purpose is, and how we show up for it, as well as articulating that for our employees and our teams.
I think that's a really good point, actually, about making sure you're actually following through and living that value. And I think, yeah, I mean, the classic example is the company that will say something about their internal culture. So like a throwaway statement that's easy, but it sounds nice, looks good on paper, it's great for the marketing, like we are anti-bullying or something like that.
Yep.
And then there's an incident of bullying in the office, but they do nothing about it because the person who's done it is one of their high performers. And they think, we can't afford to do anything about that. We can't afford to lose that person. Mm-hmm. And so the message that sends really is, well, what you said about the culture, that just wasn't true, was it? So, yeah. Bye. By contrast, I think one really powerful way of getting that right is to make yourself accountable as the leader to the rest of the team. So the leader who says, this is what I want the culture to be. This is the way we think we should be working. These are the values. These are the behaviors that we think are important. However, I'm human. I make mistakes. If you see me get this wrong, please call me out on it. There will be no repercussion, no punishment. I just, I would call you out. So I want you to do the same to me. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's polar opposites, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. As leaders, we don't think we're so focused on being what we think a leader should be. And this concept of asking for feedback and admitting that you're not perfect, that goes against what many of us originally thought leadership was. And so again, it's where it comes down to that leadership isn't easy, but it's not as complicated as we make it. If we think that a leader's supposed to be perfect and never make any mistakes, that's where we're overcomplicating it to an extreme. So I love the example that you just gave because it highlights that very well.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned about the myths of leadership earlier. I call them my pet peeves of leadership, but that's definitely one of them. I think this idea this perception, whether it's the leader themselves or the people they're leading, expecting it of them, that they've got to be perfect all the time and they can never make a mistake. What I think that usually leads into is they just won't admit when they've made a mistake because they can't. And that just makes it all so much worse. I think I guess a slightly different version of that is the expectation that the leader will always have the answer. And again, I've spoken about this one before. The listeners are bored of me complaining about this one, I'm sure. But, if you think you have to have the answer, but you don't have the answer, you'll just give any answer. And it'll end up being the wrong one, probably. And that just makes, again, everything so much worse. And you just end up having to pick up all the pieces even more than you would have.
Well, and we take away a valuable opportunity when we don't have the answer for our employees to step up and have it. And so that's the other piece, is that if I always have the answer, I'm not allowing growth opportunities for my employees. I'm not able to see the way that they think about situations. If something is going poorly, I'm not able to see how they're processing that. So in my very humble opinion, it is better in many cases if the leader doesn't have all the answer. It's better for them because it takes that pressure away, but it's also better for the team because then it starts naturally allowing your employees' strengths to rise up and the team as a whole to recognize what those strengths are. So I am 100% on board with you, David. Leaders do not have to have all the answers. They can have space for their employees to step in and be the hero every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, going back to employee engagement as well, there's a great opportunity there to build a bit of engagement because, what employee is going to react negatively to suddenly having an opportunity to be part of the solution instead of having the wrong answer, but being told they've got to do it anyway. Because they'll probably know if it's the wrong answer better than you will as a leader in a lot of cases. They
will always assume that your employees are smarter than you and you will never go wrong.
Yes, I like that. That's words to live by, definitely.
Yeah.
So we may have already covered this actually, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What is the biggest leadership lesson you've learned in your career so far?
Oh, there's so many.
Top three.
Okay, we can do top three. The first one is absolutely you don't have to have all of the answers. The second one is to allow your employees to see you make mistakes because this does a few things. Again, it takes the pressure off of you. It allows you to be human, but it also teaches your employees how you want them to handle their mistakes. And so as a leader, if I'm saying, I really messed up, I'm so sorry. Can we figure out how to fix this together? Then that opens the door the next time they make a mistake to bring me in as their partner versus their discipliner. And then the third would be we are not as emotionally intelligent as we think we are. We will never get to the point where we have the emotional intelligence that we need to never cause unintended harm. So it's that constant, how can we constantly be looking for ways to know more about ourselves and know more about how we interact with the world around us? And when we can keep that in mind, it can add this level of humility that I think is critical for leaders to continuously be growing and learning and looking for when their team may have a better answer than they do.
Yeah, I like all of those. The mistake one as well for me. The bit of it that kind of confuses me is you're basically saying that you're not human. If you, anyone surely with a bit of, it doesn't even take a lot of self-awareness to admit that you will make mistakes because you're a human and that's what we do, right? So by not admitting that you've made the mistake, by not acknowledging that it's happened, you're not just missing out on an opportunity to build a better rapport with your employees, but you're basically just saying, look, I'm better than you. I'm not human. I don't make mistakes because I'm the leader. So if you saw a thing that you thought was a mistake, that's just you not understanding it. And it's just such terrible leadership, isn't it? But the arrogance involved in that, and we're back to ego again.
Yes. And the employees will pick up, they will see that from a mile away or a kilometer away, and immediately they lose trust, they lose respect. And so all of these things happen by leaders trying to give the illusion that they're perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it also feeds into your third one about emotional intelligence, because you're not picking up on how they're going to react to that.
Yes.
Anyway, yes. Let's not rant about it too much, because this one usually leads me into a conversation about politics and politicians, because that seems to be the norm these days in politics, is if you've made a mistake, whatever you do, don't admit it.
Yes. It's like I have no idea what has happened to politicians as a whole across the board.
I know, just
What are
like
you
the
doing?
mental gymnastics involved in not admitting the mistake as well sometimes. I mean, you sort of have to admire the skill, actually, sometimes.
I mean, you can admire the sheer audacity that it takes to, one, make some of the statements that the politicians are making, but then two, like you said, that mental gymnastics to be able to, it's like, I'm sorry, what? So offline, we should go get a beer and we can talk about this all day long.
Oh yes, definitely.
All day.
Yeah. One day I might have to start a politics podcast as well, but anyway. Today is not that day.
Today is not that day.
New leaders, new managers, first timers. What's the first thing that someone should do when they're promoted to a leadership role?
Don't make any changes for as long as your organization will allow you. My recommendation is 90 days. Not all organizations will give you the gift of time, but your responsibility when you go into a new team or a team that you have been a peer, but now you're growing into a leader position, is to observe, see how things work. And as much as your brain is telling you, you have to make an impact, you have to show that you are worth hiring, all of these things, try and minimize that voice as much as possible and just be there for your team. Figure out, find those pain points that your team has that you could actually do something about. So one of my favorite leaders I've ever worked with, she came in and the break room was horrid. It hadn't been updated since the 70s. It smelled a little weird. And so the very first thing she did was completely refresh the break room. And so take those small opportunities to be able to give back to your employees, your team, without asking for anything in return. Build the trust and then make the impact. But don't try and make the impact without the trust.
Very good point. I think the trust is crucial. And if you have the time and you can afford to do it, that's, not always the case. But more than that as well, though, I think maybe the secondary part of that is, especially if you're new to the organization, you really want to just come in and start changing everything on day one. You might end up throwing out all the stuff that works. Figure out what works first, and you need time to do that, as you say. But again, I think if you are a new leader being brought into a new situation, sometimes that's because they want you to change something.
Yes. And that's where, as you grow in the corporate ladder, you start being able to use the influence that you have built to slow things down in areas that you really want to observe and then speed things up, kind of that low-hanging fruit, if you will. But it is, especially if you're a new manager and leader, finding that balance of how can you slow down your stakeholders that hired you so you can be there for your team it's a fine balance. It's a fine balance.
Indeed. That's another reason why leadership's so difficult, of course.
Agreed.
Yeah. What would be your best experience of being led? Is it the person who changed the break room, or is there a better one?
So when I joined Disney, I did the college program, so frontline hourly. And then I did the management internship, which was a salaried position. And then I went back to front-time hourly. And when I went back to the part-time hourly position, I was working in a sports store. And David, when I tell you that I know nothing about sports, people would come in and they're like, do you have a Mickey that represents the Bears? And I'm like, is that football? Basketball? They're like, why are you working in a sports store? I ask myself that every day that I wake up, every day. And I had a leader, Michelle, and she took a chance on me because I was very intense, is a good way to put it. And so she took a chance. She gave me the temporary position that I was talking about. It was a 3-month TA and working at the water parks. And I went in and I wanted to do an amazing, amazing, amazing job. Have you ever wanted to do a really good job, but you knew in your heart of hearts that you were failing? That was the position that I was in. And so I knew I was doing a poor job, which made me completely overcorrect and do all of the things and take on all of the projects and stay late. And finally, Michelle brought me into her office and she sat me down and she said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not working. Can I help? And in that moment, everything changed. We met for a couple of hours every week. And she taught me not only what it meant to be a leader, but to be a leader at Walt Disney World. Because I think so many times, especially if you have an organization with a truly strong culture, you forget people coming in from the outside aren't going to immediately know what that looks like. And that is the best example of leadership I have ever seen, simply because she wasn't going to sit back and watch me fail. She was going to have the hard conversations. She was going to open up the door, but it wasn't in a way to be disciplined, because she could have absolutely jumped straight to discipline. It was in a partnership. How can she educate me so I can perform for her what she needed for me? And I never forgot that. And she is mentioned in the book multiple times. I am still in touch with her. She is one of my favorite humans. But anytime I think of an exceptional moment of leadership, that always pops at the top of mind.
I mean, it sounds great. Yeah.
She's an amazing leader.
Yeah. I mean, it's what we were saying earlier, isn't it? I guess about understanding the individual and what their needs are, and not just taking that process or pro forma approach to leadership. Because, as you say, I mean, that would have been the easy out, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. And I think it also shows that she cared about her people, which is another aspect of effective and good leadership, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because if you don't care, you don't do things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, she was the person that throughout my corporate experience, anytime I went into an area that I didn't know or something wasn't working, she's still the person that I would call. And when we build those moments, and that's why I talk about the magic of leadership. When we think about magic, a lot of times we think about like a rabbit being pulled out of a hat. But when I talk about the magic of leadership, it's when one person comes into your life, whether for 30 minutes or 30 years, and that moment in time completely changes the trajectory of your life. And that in that moment, that's what Michelle did for me. And as leaders, that's what we have the power and the responsibility to do. And I think it's so amazing when we get it right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't put it any better than that. So I'm not even going to try. I'm totally sympathise on the sports thing as well. Like, if that had been me, I would have been like, bear? No, Mickey's a mouse.
Right. What are you talking about? Exactly. Yes, it was. It was the worst couple of months. Oh, so bad.
Amazing. So on that note, then, if you could start your career over again, would you do anything differently? Like maybe not work in the sports shop?
This is always a hard question, because I can look back and clearly see where I made mistakes. But I also realize that if I didn't make those mistakes, I wouldn't be where I am today. So many of those sometimes bad moments, sometimes horrible moments, have allowed me the empathy and the emotional intelligence to help people that either haven't gone through it or are currently going through it. So part of me wants to say yes, because I know I'm not perfect and I made mistakes, but the other part of me wants to say no, because they've made me who I am. So can I not answer the question?
Well, you sort of have. So,
okay, that works. That works.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with you. That's a couple of people have asked me the same question, and that's the answer I usually give as well. It's like, yes, but, or no, if.
Yes, if I could have all of the information and all of the awareness and all of the emotional intelligence without having made the mistake, then yes, there were things that I would have done differently.
Yeah, that's it. If I could go back but retain everything I know now, and then I don't have to make those mistakes because I already know the lesson, then yeah, great. Who wouldn't?
Fantastic.
Yeah, if only. Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, last question. Time's been flying, so we must have been enjoying ourselves.
Yes.
This is my favourite question. It's called Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, if you're feeling brave, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
There's so many answers. But the answer that I'm always give and will stick with, because the question never gets asked for fictitious too. So I'm like General Leia and Dumbledore and all of these people. But okay, so it would actually be McGonagall, not Dumbledore. But anyways, so the person that I would choose, and I'm breaking the rules, I'm sorry, but my parents. And the reason why is because my dad was an alcoholic. He quit drinking when I was in first grade. My mom, they both came from pretty tumultuous childhoods. And I can remember vividly being a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. And my dad brought my brother and I through the drive-thru at Burger King where my mom was working. And she gave us a couple of milkshakes. And then my dad dropped us off at my grandmother's and he went to go deliver pizzas. And then after my dad quit drinking, I watched him get his GED, both of my parents with 2 small kids, go to college, graduate college. And then my dad retired as a director of a drug and alcohol abuse treatment center, and my mom retired as a registered nurse. And so they were the epitome of checking their egos, not letting their egos dictate what they do, and also creating the life that they want, even when it's hard. And watching them and having them distill that in me. And they distilled a love of feedback because I knew that it was being given out of love and not out of frustration or resentment. And there's so many reasons why they are my person, them together. But yeah, it would absolutely be my parents.
Well, fair enough. I think parents count as one person, don't they? From the perspective of their children, like that's an entity.
Yeah,
So,
like I don't think about my mom without my dad, or my dad without my mom. So
yeah, so I'll allow it. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I've said it before, and I'll no doubt say it again. But I think the answers that I always find the most meaningful and compelling to this question are the ones where you've experienced their leadership yourself personally. Because I think, there are great and interesting conversations to have about historical figures or fictional characters, but none of us have actually worked with them or lived with them or experienced their leadership in the real world. And so answers like this one are always much nicer, I think. And it is. I mean, the leadership behaviors that you've described, I mean, that's exactly it, isn't it? It's the follower, you, the child in this case, has ended up with a better life directly because of the leadership displayed, in this case, leading by example as much as anything. And yeah, nothing else I can say about that, really. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I have had a wonderful time talking with you today.
Well, likewise. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. I will ask you one more thing, and that is, if any of the listeners, and I'm sure many of them would, like to learn more about you, perhaps get a copy of that book.
Yes.
Where can they go? Where can they find it?
So I actually have a gift for all of your listeners. If they want to go to unlockingthemagicofleadership.com/MYF for Manage Yourself First, they will get the first section. So the first 3 chapters of my book, which is all about managing yourself first, that emotional intelligence. Chapter 2 is aptly named Check Yourself Before You Wreck Yourself. I'm very proud of that. So again, it's unlockingthemagicofleadership.com/MYF, and that will have all of my contact information available as well.
Lovely. Well, we always like a gift. Thank you for that. Very generous. And that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much, Summer, for your time today. It's been lovely meeting you. Loved our conversation as well, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Summer, thank you again so much for your time today. Really loved that conversation. So many important and varied topics that we covered there on leadership. And it was great hearing your stories, your experiences working at such a massive corporation as Disney. Given the reputation it has in the world generally, it's nice to hear that it gets things right a lot of the time, at least with its employees as well. Listener or viewer, if you're watching us on YouTube, do check the description below. You will find all of the links to learn more about Summer, get a copy of the book, etc., as discussed. You'll also find links to my website to sign up for the Integrity Leaders community, or my newsletter, or both, up to you, or my LinkedIn profile. Do feel free anytime to reach out, drop me a message, let's have a chat about leadership, or give me some feedback about the podcast. Always really happy to hear either of those, really. Whatever it is you want to say, I'm always happy to hear it, as long as it's about leadership or the podcast. Join us again tomorrow for the final episode of this week, the final International Leadership Week episode. It's going to be a solo one. It's probably going to be only about half an hour long. I haven't actually recorded it yet because it's going to be recorded live on LinkedIn. So again, find the link to come and listen. Join me tomorrow. It's going to be a sum up of the week, everything I've learned from all the events I've been to, some reflections on what we've heard from the various guests on the podcast this week. And then if I can tie it in a nice, neat little bow, I will draw some nice conclusions about what makes successful collaboration as well. Hope to see you there. Well, I won't see you. It's an audio event. Hope to hear you there. Hope to know you're there. That'll do. And until then, remember, as always, be a leader, not a boss.